The land of tango has developed yet another problem, one that, on this occasion, has nothing to do with inflation, the peso, dollarization, or anything else. What we're talking about is this other setback.
Drug violence explodes in Argentina.
We're talking about nothing less than drug trafficking and all the crime that goes with this violent activity. So while it is true that Argentina has the 4th lowest homicide rate in all of Latin America, there is one place where things are already radically different. I am referring to the city of Rosario. You see, Rosario records more than 5 times the national average, with 22 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. It is a figure that is already much closer to that of countries like Mexico or Colombia, 2 countries that have had a serious violence problem for a very long time. But take note, because Rosario is not just any city, it is the 3rd most populated city in the country. Well, in just 2 years, in 2022 and 2023, 471 people were killed in this place. On top of that, more than half of these murders were committed in very specific areas that account for approximately 12% of the city's territory. In other words, we are talking about terribly violent neighborhoods or districts. Now, what on earth is going on? You see, it is in these areas where the operations of more than a dozen criminal groups, often linked to the drug trade, are concentrated. These are groups that are in an open war amongst themselves, and whose violence is already spilling over to the rest of the population of Rosario.
An Argentine city paralyzed after 4 drug-related homicides against the civilian population, without cabs or buses and with closed schools. This is how Rosario, Argentina's 3rd city, lived this Monday, after 4 murders linked to drug trafficking that led to the government sending federal forces and an Italian-style anti-mafia bill.
Some are already talking about the Narco anomaly in the Santa Fe region, which is where Rosario is located. Others compare this city to El Salvador before Bukele, and some go further and call Rosario the Sinaloa of Argentina. As you can see, Milei not only has to face the dire economic legacy, but also a growing and uncontrolled lack of security that is already beginning to dominate large parts of the country. No joke. When the narco spreads, it tends to take everything by storm. The thing is that many of you, especially those of you who are not watching us from Argentina, may not have had the slightest idea that we could encounter such security problems in this country. And that stands to reason, because although drug trafficking has existed in the country for many years, until now it has been more or less discreet and under control. But for some time now, it has been getting totally out of control. The risk, the great concern of Argentines now, is that other cities will follow Rosario, that the violence will spread, and the power of the drug traffickers will even reach Buenos Aires. And in view of this serious risk, here on VisualPolitik, we have asked ourselves a few questions. What has happened so that drug trafficking is starting to wreak real havoc in Argentina? What does Javier Milei's government intend to do to tackle this problem? Could the libertarian government apply a Bukele-type strategy to nip the problem in the bud? Well, let's get into it.
Houston, we have a problem.
As we have just told you, drug trafficking is not exactly new in Argentina, much less in Rosario. What has changed is the nature of drug trafficking. You see, until recently, the country was nothing more than a transit route for drugs. For example, the most common narcotic drug transported through Argentina is cocaine, and in short, the route you're about to see has been one of the best known routes for years. Take a look. First, the cocaine leaves in small planes that take off from clandestine airstrips in the Bolivian departments of Beni and Tarija, which are production centers. These planes fly over areas where there is almost no radar coverage, such as the Paraguayan Chaco, where they land. Paraguay was chosen because it has the worst controls on drug trafficking in the region. The cargo is then loaded onto trucks and ships, which transport it along the Paraná-Paraguay waterway. This waterway is a natural river transport corridor of more than 3,400 kilometers long. Well, this corridor allows navigation between the ports of Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay on a continuous basis. Let me ask you a question. Do you know which Argentine city is bathed by the Paraná River? Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Rosario. But to make matters worse, this waterway flows into the Atlantic Ocean very close to Buenos Aires. In other words, the city of Rosario dominates a magnificent route to the Atlantic. It is a perfect highway for exporting Bolivian and Peruvian cocaine and Paraguayan marijuana to the rest of the world. In fact, that's how Rosario and other areas of Argentina have been for many years. A transit route that in the end didn't generate too many headaches at home. Basically, no sooner had the drugs arrived than they were on their way again. The problem? Well, this is no longer the case. And the question is, why? Well, take a look.
cocaine consumption skyrocketed in Argentina. It leads the ranking in South America.
According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, the land of tango is where cocaine consumption has increased the most over the last decade. And right now, it is already the country in the region with the second highest per capita consumption after Uruguay. And we are not only talking about white powder. In the same period, Argentinian marijuana consumers have grown by 300%. In other words, Argentina is no longer just a transit point for Latin American narcotics, but it is now also a major consumer. And that is something that is totally changing the rules of the game. The international drug transport business passing through Argentina has been dominated mainly by Brazilian groups, such as the First Capital Command and the Red Command, or Comando Vermelho. Of course, these groups often work with large cartels, such as the Colombian cartels, to move their merchandise through the region. The problem is that trafficking in Argentina is now controlled not only by these foreign organized crime groups, which after all have little interest in the local market, but also by small but growing local criminal groups. They are what is known as drug trafficking clans and are mainly dedicated to retail, that is, sales to the end consumer. But as the business has grown, so has its strength and the competition between various organizations. For many experts, this could be a stepping stone to bigger problems, or even the emergence of better organized mafia groups and cartels. And there seems to be a certain consensus that the turning point of this whole story in cities like Rosario took place in 2012. In that year, the Cantero clan, also known as Los Monos, suffered a major blow when their leader, Claudio Ariel Cantero, was assassinated. This murder triggered a huge turf war in which other local clans, such as the Funes, Basi, and Ungaro clans began to massacre each other. And so, violence suddenly began to spill over into the streets, and the authorities hardly knew what to do to control it. Worst of all, this clash between clans continues to this day, and there is no way to stop it. In Rosario, the line has already been crossed from drug trafficking to narco violence, which is why news like this is now more the norm than the exception.
Hitman industry in Rosario. 70% of murders in the city are due to drug gang warfare.
At the end of the day, all this is a consequence of the growth of the local narcotics market, because the goods no longer only pass through Argentina, but now many of them stay there. Logically, this means that these clans are making more and more money, and with that money, they can acquire more and more weapons and control their business in more neighborhoods through wars, bribes, and extortion of local businesses. This is multiplying the psychosis and fear among the entire population. In fact, this is exactly what the Rosario Narcos are looking for, because now the new Argentine government is stepping up the fight against them.
We are going to kill more innocents per year. We want our rights. See our children and family.
Bruno Busanic was a gas station operator who was shot several times at point-blank range by a hitman in the pay of drug traffickers. His crime was not an isolated incident. In those days, in March 2024, the Narcos also murdered 2 cab drivers and a bus driver. And a few weeks ago, this happened in a pharmacy.
Violence in Rosario. They shot up a pharmacy and left a note that said pay.
In the latter case, it is believed that this pharmacy, which is in a hot area of Rosario, was being extorted by the Narcos to pay a kind of revolutionary tax. You know their maxim, silver or lead. That has not changed. And since they apparently did not pay, the result was pure and simple terrorism. And that's not all. They have also threatened the governor of the province of Santa Fe, Maximiliano Polaro, and his minister of security, Pablo Cococcioni. The reason? Well, according to the Narcos, their rights are being violated because the Santa Fe government has begun publishing photos of criminals in prisons in the purest Bukele-style, specifically in the Pinheiro prison. The objective of the Narcos, in the end, is to instill psychosis and fear among the population in order to pressure the political powers to stop squeezing them. Yet for now, Milei's government seems ready to put an end to the narco trade once and for all, and it has a plan to do so. Now, what does this plan consist of? Well, let's find out.
The Bandera Plan.
A partir de ahora vamos a trabajar con mucho más énfasis para lograr que Rosario sea una ciudad liberada de esta nueva policriminalidad que tenemos hoy en esta ciudad y en las ciudades de alrededor que se van expandiendo.
Barely a week after taking office, on 18th of December 2023, the new Argentine government declared war on narcotics. And this time, it seems to be doing so with a clear plan in hand.
Minister Bullrich presents the Bandera Plan to recover the province of Santa Fe.
Of course, it is not uncommon for these anti-narcotics plans to fail or fall on deaf ears for various reasons. So the question is, what exactly is the plan devised by Milei and Patricia Bullrich, his Minister of Security? First of all, to regain total control of the prisons at all costs. That is, to prevent the drug clans from being able to operate from the prisons, give orders, and maintain communication with their pawns on the outside. To achieve this, the provincial government has chosen the Pinheiro prison to make it a sort of equivalent to the CCOT, Bukele's high-security macro prison in El Salvador. The fact is that this Argentine prison has imposed a regime of total isolation on incarcerated drug traffickers, a rather drastic measure that, probably if it were not for Bukele's example, no one would have dared to apply. Then, and this is the crucial point of Plan Bandera, there is the reinforcement of the police in the province of Santa Fe, especially with forces from the federal government. Specifically, Bullrich has sent hundreds of additional national gendarmerie troops, something that the previous government of Alberto Fernandez had already begun to do. The objective, apart from reinforcing street security, is to implement private mail detection and drug interception programs, weapons reduction programs, and also to establish new channels for anonymous complaints. And there's even more. The number of mobile units, that is, motorized units, dedicated to the fight against drug trafficking has also multiplied, and not precisely in a small number, from 20 at the beginning of Milei's government to some 290, of which today some 200 are already in operation. Even Kirchnerist governors such as Axel Kicillof from the province of Buenos Aires are sending mobile units to Rosario. On top of that, Minister Bullrich wants to change Article 34 of the Argentine Penal Code to, among other things, make it easier for police to use lethal weapons in dangerous situations. According to the minister, this change will prevent unjust arrests of police officers who are only doing their job. But let's move on. Another key pillar of the plan is the creation of a sort of integrated response to coordinate the anti-narcotics operations of state and provincial, civilian, and military forces. In other words, all of the country's security forces will work together against drug trafficking. Now at this point, I'm sure you are all wondering, after 3 months in operation, how are all these changes working? Well, here we have a bit of a mixed bag. You see, at the beginning of March 2024, the government was quite optimistic.
Patricia Bullrich confirms that murders in Rosario dropped 57% with the new Plan Bandera.
Indeed, Bullrich was not lying. Up until that point, the plan seemed to be working reasonably well, and for proof, the data. While in February 2023, 33 homicides were recorded in Rosario, in February 2024, only 7 were recorded.
According to the latest report from the Public Prosecutor's Office, Rosario recorded the lowest number of murders in a decade for the first quarter of the year.
However, as we have told you before, at the end of March, things began to change. In a matter of a week, the clans murdered 4 innocent civilians. VisualPolitik viewers, Plan Bandera, although it seems to be working, is now getting a response from the narco groups. The risk is that what has already happened in Mexico will start happening there. In other words, that a violent war between the authorities and the narco clans will become entrenched, with many civilian victims caught in between, something that obviously terrifies Argentines and also the government itself. So, faced with this problem, Milei's government is now ready to put on the table the last of the options, the most drastic of all: militarize the conflict. Yes, that's right. Although armed forces have been on the ground in Rosario for some weeks now, Milei wants the army to play a much more active role in the war against drugs. It's a controversial idea that does not please everyone, neither at a social level, nor at a political level, nor at a military level, since some high commanders believe that this conflict does not fit with a military nature. And the truth is that under current Argentine law, they are partly right. Neither the security law nor the defense law allows the army to actively fight drug trafficking. For this reason, they have asked the government to reform both laws before seeking to deploy more units in order to broaden their scope of action, including the fight against drug trafficking and drug violence. But of course, without a majority in the House, and with other laws and decrees still to be passed, this process could take longer than expected. So for now, the army will only provide logistical and tactical assistance to civilian forces. VisualPolitik viewers, using the military in extreme situations usually sounds like a good idea, but it's not so easy. It is not only a legal issue, but also a question of training issues within the military to face a task that is beyond their nature. And in the case of Argentina, it also entails budget problems. The resources of the armed forces are limited. Precisely for that reason, and as I said previously, one of the things that most worries Argentina is to end up like Mexico. And in Mexico, the military was used with a less than favorable result. Yes, it is true that the Mexican cartels have been very powerful for decades, and that they have nothing to do with the Argentine narco groups. But beware of taking lightly the militarization of this conflict. The result in Mexico has been that instead of the problem getting better, it got worse. Homicides have more than doubled since 1990, and things have been getting even worse in recent years. As a result, there is speculation that Milei may try to implement more of a hybrid Bukele-type model, involving the armed forces, but focusing primarily on prison pressure and a much tougher judicial system. Be that as it may, in order to achieve this, he will first have to deal with another major problem: corruption within the security forces. Something that will also take time. Ending corruption is never straightforward. And don't think we're talking about a minor issue. Between 2015 and 2019 alone, and just in the province of Buenos Aires, 13,000 police officers were involved in drug trafficking, out of some 100,000 police officers. That's a lot of police. They are called polinarcos. And not surprisingly, with such a track record, it is difficult to think that Milei's administration could quickly and effectively attack drug trafficking in this way. Let me say it again, the problem is not an easy one. In Latin America, the fight against drug trafficking has often been a resounding failure. Be that as it may, the Bandera plan aspires to reach its goal. The Milei government does not want this matter to get out of hand, and to prevent it, it is willing to use all the means at its disposal. So the big question we are all wondering is, will Milei be able to put an end once and for all to these criminal groups, to prevent the problem from spreading and bring security back to Rosario? And if he does, how will he do it? Will he end up militarizing the conflict? What would you do? Let us know in the comments what you think. And as always, thank you very much for being there. All the best. See you next time.